am going to get us oriented to our big discussion today. So I'm going to give a really brief overview of a very large topic, and then introducing some of the work that Ren has been doing on women's economic empowerment. And then I'm going to ask our panelists to join me on stage to really dig in on their areas of expertise. We're fortunate to live in a time and a place where we have strong economic growth and low unemployment, but prosperity is not shared equally by all in our community. Let's see, statewide, about 20% of women live in poverty. Here in Greenville County, it's a little bit lower. 17% of women in Greenville County are living in poverty, but that's still far too high. And that's a higher rate than the poverty level of men. And nearly 34%, that's more than 1/3 of families with a female head of household are below the poverty level. That's not because women don't work or work extremely hard. Women do work. However, they're more likely to be out of the workforce at every stage and age. So starting right in the early days of career, women are more likely to be out of the workforce or to work less, and certainly to be underpaid and underrepresented in leadership. These gaps start early and they grow over time. And women in South Carolina earn significantly less to this day than men do. And when you add racial disparity to those differences, they're even wider. Dr. Childers is going to go more into a lot of the statistics on labor force participation and the wage gap here in South Carolina and how we compare nationally to other states. But we want to set that stage that we still are, women in South Carolina, are underemployed and undercompensated. And this is particularly problematic because women are increasingly responsible for their households. 2/3 of women are primary or co-breadwinners in South Carolina. So we cannot grow our economy or guarantee the health and well-being of our families and communities if we don't address these disparities head on. The wealth gap is a really striking example of some of the challenges we face. So we talk a lot about the income gap or the wage gap, but how this then magnifies when we're talking about accumulated assets and wealth over time is really stark. Nationwide, women only own 32 cents on the dollar compared to men. And when we look at women of color, it's only pennies on the dollar. Because of this wealth gap, women are 80% more likely than men to be impoverished at age 65 and older. Women are spending more of their income on their children, on their households, investing in those basic needs. They're earning less, and that is putting them in a very precarious situation in retirement, and also meaning if they can retire, and also meaning that they are able to invest less in the intergenerational opportunities for their families. On the other hand, we do have tremendous potential to unleash these intergenerational opportunities if we do invest in women. Women tend to invest more of their income into the well-being of their children. This is a sticky, stubborn thing. It'll catch up. There we go. So we see empowered women lead to healthier families and a more productive economy. South Carolina is anticipating a significant workforce shortage in the coming decade, due in large part to the rapid growth of the advanced manufacturing sector. The state's economy has experienced consistent employment growth. And although this is positive for our existing workforce, the low unemployment rate has begun to make it more difficult for employers to find new qualified workers. South Carolina is estimated to face a shortage of more than 26,000 workers per year over the next decade. This workforce shortage represents a unique opportunity for women to increase their presence in the state's labor force while generating a net economic gain for the state. Wren commissioned the Darla Moore School of Business's Division of Research to look at what the potential economic impacts would be of getting more women into the workforce. And they projected that if we get women not just in the workforce in any old jobs, but in industries and occupations that desperately need to find talented workers, qualified workers, we can grow our economy by more than $5 billion annually over the next decade. We can also reduce the male and female wage gap by 8%, create more jobs, and create additional opportunities for labor income. So there is a huge and compelling business case to be made for investing in women's economic potential. The question is how? So Wren has spent some time thinking about what it looks like. We've consulted with partners, with donors, with representatives from the private sector, with nonprofit organizations, elected officials, and civic leaders, and set out this broad vision for women in our state to be economically secure, capable, and mobile. And to do that, there's not one solution. It really is multiple levels. There are some fundamental building blocks that we will look at. First of all, education. We have to improve access to high quality educational opportunities and settings from early childhood through post-secondary, including relevant training for the workforce. Women are more highly educated than men in our state. That's a fact, and President Newkirk will talk more about that in her remarks. But that educational advantage is not necessarily translating into economic success or equity. So we need to look at those pathways to ensure that girls and young women are getting the information, the resources, and the support they need to fulfill their potential when they do enter the workforce. On workforce, I just spoke about the statewide shortage we have. So companies in South Carolina have to worry about finding people with the appropriate skills, but also how they're going to attract and retain those in positions in their companies. We need to create a safer, more inclusive, and diverse workforce where all women can thrive. Whether women are working for others or working for themselves, we need to look at hiring and recruiting practices to ensure that diverse women get in the door and advance up the career ladder. That includes looking at compensation, benefits, schedules, and making sure that, yes, South Carolina women work, but does South Carolina work for women? We also have to look at the assets and social supports that women have access to. Do women have the access to the essential services and resources that promote their economic stability and mobility, that allow them to weather uncertainties and to invest in their futures? This includes access to high quality and affordable childcare, social safety nets, affordable and stable housing, accessible transportation, health and family planning, and other social services and supports, which will be different for different groups of women. But education, employment, and assets and social supports won't necessarily add up to empowerment if the right conditions aren't in place. Next slide. Thank you. The environment in which women and girls live must also promote their safety, agency, voice, and connectivity. When we talk about safety, we mean physical, social, and emotional safety and freedom from violence, which is a basic precondition for participation in economic, social, and political life of our society. When we talk about agency, does the environment support women's and girls' ability to set goals and make decisions regarding their finances or the finances of their families? Connectivity, that's physical and social connectivity. It includes transportation, access to broadband, social networks, all of which are essential to finding jobs and accessing services and resources. And finally, voice. Does the environment support women's and girls' vocal articulation of their goals and their aspirations for their leadership? We've constructed this basic framework to set the stage for having conversations about women's economic empowerment. And we're going to ask you to help us today to make this into reality, to talk about it, help us take it apart, and talk about what it means for the communities you live and work in here in the upstate. And now I'm going to welcome our panelists for this first session to the stage to join me in conversation. So can the panelists please join me on stage, please? I'm going to introduce everyone briefly while they have a seat, because they all have long and impressive bios, and we have to struggle to boil them down. I will start with Minor Shaw. Minor Shaw is the president of Miko LLC, a private investment company in Greenville. She serves on the board of directors of Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, the Columbia Funds Mutual Funds Group, and the advisory board of Duke Energy Corporation. She is the chairman of the Duke Endowment, the Daniel Mickle Foundation, and Hollingsworth Funds, and the Greenville-Spartanburg Airport Commission. Please join me in welcoming Minor.
Thank you.
Faith Adedokin is a Greenville Network for Southern Economic Mobility team leader and senior consultant at Open Fields. The network, which she'll tell us more about, is a team examining how well Greenville's existing systems are reaching young people facing the most difficult barriers to advancement. Please join me in welcoming Faith. Nichelle Harrison is the owner of the MAP Agency, which was established in 2016. MAP stands for Modern Access to Professionals. This innovative workforce developing staffing business connects professional, experienced women who have an extended absence on their resume to companies that know the value women bring to the workforce. Welcome, Nichelle. Amanda McDougall-Scott is Research Associate for the Institute for Child Success. She has a Master of Science in Applied Experimental Psychology and is currently pursuing her PhD in International Community and Family Studies at Clemson, and she is a graduate of the Furman Women's Leadership Institute. Welcome, Amanda. Betsy Neely-Sikma is the Vice President of Talent and Economic Inclusion for the Spartanburg Area Chamber of Commerce. Betsy learned the power of economic inclusion during her 5 years at Axion in Chicago, a nonprofit microlender and business development organization. Betsy's past work has sought to upskill talent and address the tech skills gap. Welcome to Betsy. And we're going to start by asking each of you to briefly introduce yourselves, and if you could tell us a little bit more about the work that you do to empower economically women, girls, families, and the communities where you work. And I'm going to ask you to start, Faith, if you would.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? I can't tell. Are we good? Okay, there we go. My name is Faith Adedokin, and I do work with the Network for Southern Economic Mobility. I joined on with that team a little over a year and a half ago. And really the goal at the outset was to put together a network of cities that realized that there was a little bit of a ways to go and really making sure that we were creating communities that were equitable for all. We were sponsored by a think tank based out of Durham, North Carolina, and have really spent the past 2 years digging really deep into some of the data of specifically what it looks like for Greenville. Kind of having been involved with some of these organizations locally, there's a lot of national level data to say, yes, there are problems that affect every community in our country, but specifically for Greenville, a place that is exploding and it's growing and there's so much good about what's happening, what are the areas where we can really dig in to move the needle forward for our community? So our goal at the outset was to specifically kind of drill down to looking at youth. For people who still have a lot of potential on the road ahead of them so that they're not reacting to the things that have already happened. How do we create a road where they're able to avoid those impediments that work against economic mobility? So that's really what our team has been about. And it's been really exciting. It's been really illuminating to work with local leaders and organizations who are really passionate about that same thing.
Great, thank you, Faith.
Do you want me to go?
Yes, please,
Okay.
Minor, if you would.
I'm Minor Shaw, and I have been fortunate enough to be involved in different areas. One would be the corporate world with service on for-profit boards, and the other is the nonprofit world, of the philanthropic world in particular. And so I see this at two different levels. In the corporate world, service on corporate boards, I have seen certainly the situation where I've been the only woman in the room, and that is a somewhat uncomfortable situation at many times, but one that is also empowering, and you understand what your role might be and how you can bring the female voice into the room. And then I've also been in a situation, and am in that situation now with the boards that I serve on corporately, where I am one of 3 or 4 women, and I've been able to see what a difference it makes in the discourse in the room when you have the feminine voice, the female voice in the room, because as you all know, we have a certain ability to look at situations in a different way, maybe holistically, maybe more holistically, and we can bring that discourse to the table, and I've seen that it really works. So in my role on both the corporate boards and also the philanthropic boards, nonprofit, I have seen what a difference it makes to have women in the room, and have tried to, whenever possible, make sure that we have and at all times actually, make sure that we have qualified, strong women leadership in the room in whatever board that I'm on. So I think that's really important, and I would urge all of you to make sure that you put yourself out there, even if you are not comfortable in the role and you think you might not be qualified, then become educated and put yourself out in those situations so that you can be around the table and in the room and making a difference. And then with particularly in my philanthropic roles, with chairman of the Hollingsworth Funds and chairman of the Duke Endowment and the Daniel Mickle Foundation, it's been interesting to be able to see the data that Ann referred to, and to work with organizations like MDC out of Durham, North Carolina, which was the organization that started this Southern Economic Mobility Network. I never get the words right. But to understand how important it is for all of us to be cognizant of the fact that we have a lack of economic mobility, particularly in the South, but particularly in this community. And I know the data for Greenville. I'm sure Spartanburg is right in the same category, but we have a 4.7% opportunity for those in the lowest quintile of wealth to be able to get to the upper quintile. And out of the, I think we're 27th in over 2,000 communities in the South that they studied. So we're not in a good spot here, and we'll talk about that more. But Hollingsworth Funds, as we've looked at this, Hollingsworth Funds has realized these issues, and we have really dedicated our philanthropy, for the most part, to looking at economic mobility, to looking at equity. So hopefully everything we will be doing has an overview of looking through the equity lens, even if it's in the arts. How can we help, whether it's quality of life, how can we help that? And certainly the Duke Endowment, it's based in Charlotte, it is philanthropy for the Carolinas. We have also looked at that, but we particularly look at child care and we look at health care. And one of our focus areas, a few years ago, we decided to really focus in on 0 to 8, which cuts across all 4 of our philanthropic divisions at the Duke Endowment. And that looks at women, it deals with women and issues, family certainly, but we also have been very instrumental in bringing Nurse Family Partnership to the Carolinas and specifically to South Carolina, and that directly deals with women, pregnant women who are single and in their first pregnancies. So hopefully we are empowering women in the social aspect.
Thank you. That's great. Nichelle?
Okay. Hi, my name is Nichelle Harrison. I am the owner of the MAP Agency, and as you heard, the MAP stands for Modern Access to Professionals. And I am in the business of connecting smart women to smart companies. The MAP Agency is the first and the only workforce development platform in the upstate to specialize in helping professional, highly skilled, experienced women re-enter the workforce after an extended absence. We also help women to pivot in their career at critical times to perhaps avoid that extended absence, and we do this by connecting them with smart companies. And a smart company, in our opinion, is a company that knows the value that women bring to the workforce, and that's career break and all. So that's what I do.
Good morning, I'm Amanda McDougald Scott, and I'm honored to be here this morning on this panel. Can anybody hear me? Okay, that's better. So I am new to ICS, but I'm thrilled to be at ICS because this is just a great place to be, to really be able to focus on the kind of systemic change that I think we need to ultimately impact women and children and to really make a difference. So for anybody who's familiar with Braun from Brenner, there's that model, but the systems change that we speak, the individual is just the beginning, and then you have to look at all the different layers of our system and be able to focus on all of those to make effective change. And so that's one of the things that we do at ICS. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that really focuses on policy research and advocacy to provide the opportunity for all children to flourish. We really focus on children 8 and under. The work that we've done is vast. We are a small but mighty team. We started here in Greenville, but we also reach the state, and we work very closely with our policymakers here in the state as well as organizations, advising on best practices and to help fill in gaps. So some of the projects that I'm really privileged to work on right now, one is a report commissioned by First Steps of Greenville to look at the state of child care in Greenville County. So some of the things that I'll be talking about throughout the day are things that I've really been living for the last month. Not only do I have a 2-year-old, in child care, but I also get this really great perspective that I get to talk to lots of leaders in the community, child care providers, which includes both directors and staff. So I really love this privilege as it's really close to my heart. But other things, just to say, ICS is also, and one of my projects is to work on a data book to update everybody on the state of children in South Carolina. But as far as going even further, in case, to make the connection extremely clear, we do advising on financial structuring and things like that will help families. And one of the things that we were successful in passing last year was the Earned Income Tax Credit, which has really helped women be able to succeed with that extra money that they have being able to be applied to bills or, taking their child maybe to the library or just housing, just normal everyday things. So I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you for being here too.
Good morning, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Just a little preface. When I first, so I'm a Spartanburg native. As Anna indicated, I was gone for about 2 decades. The last part of that was working in microfinance in Chicago. Before that, I did a little legislative work as well. When I hit the ground back in Spartanburg about 1.5 years ago, something crossed my desk with the name Wren on it, and it immediately piqued my interest because my oldest daughter's name is Wren. And then when I learned what this was all about, I thought I had named her pretty well. So very honored to be here. I'm also a Furman graduate, so it's good to be back home. And good to sit next to Amanda. We were in the Women in Leadership Fellowship together last year. So it's hard for me to sort of boil down what we're doing because I feel like we're really trying to sort of upend. You're Facebook Living this, so now I'm nervous about how I'm going to talk about it. Earmuffs to everybody who is at the chamber watching this right now. But I feel like what we're trying to do in some ways is upend systems that are built to oppress women and other folks who are prone to oppression, especially here in South Carolina. When I first came to the chamber, my job was entrepreneurial development, and I realized I should have updated my bio because over the last several months, I've really sort of shifted my focus. So I started as Director of Small Business and Entrepreneurial Development at the Chamber, but quickly learned that in Spartanburg, South Carolina, we were putting the cart before the horse a little bit, trying to focus on those things when really what we needed to focus on was economic inclusion. And so beginning in February, by the grace of many powers, including the Duke Endowment, thank you very much, we were able to launch a new department at the Spartanburg Area Chamber of Commerce focused on talent and economic inclusion. And I am currently doing a fellowship with the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives to work on just that on a national level as well. I jumped for joy, Anne, when I saw your image of the cogs up on the screen because part of my work right now is building my own visual for what drives equitable talent development. And the way that I visualize that is through cogs. So with talent at the middle, equity, leadership, policy, and measurement as the pillars around that. Other cogs that are as a part of that include systems change, to your point, Amanda, partnerships programs, and messaging, because we can't change the way that the world views women unless we change the way we're talking about ourselves. We have introduced a number of policies. It's just been a little bit of a sprint in the last several months to get the ball rolling on this. The place that we started was with a grant from the Duke Endowment to start a project called the Pipeline Project. I like to call this the Eliminating Excuses Project, which is geared towards driving inclusion in Spartanburg through infusing our boards with diverse leadership. And that includes women. It also includes folks who have been sort of traditionally put in the minority bucket, although in Spartanburg, oftentimes we're actually talking about majority minority communities. So getting those essential voices at the table, basically by systematizing the process of which people are invited to join boards and eliminating excuses for how they get there. I could go on and on, but that's a good place to start.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is an incredible panel. We could interview each of you for a long time about these issues. Would love to hear your reflections on what does an economically empowered community look like? What are the traits and qualities and characteristics? And where are we in the communities where you work, whether it's the upstate, whether it's the Carolinas, whether it's Greenville County, Spartanburg County, where are you seeing that those traits and characteristics are being modeled, and where do we still have some work to do? We're gonna go down the line again. Faith, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say first off, really what I see as the characteristics of an economically mobile community would be one where all of the participants in that community are able to access, participate, contribute to the systems of growth, right, to that area. And where those contributions are valued, where they're respected, and that really drives really trying to ratify and make more equitable the access to the benefits of that system. I mean, that's really what we're talking about when we talk about economic mobility. Because in a city like Greenville, there's a lot of growth, but there's not necessarily a lot of access or equitable access to the benefits of that growth for everyone in our community. So I would say those are some of the things that immediately jump to mind. But I would say another one of them is a community that is aware, right, of those things and really working to move the needle. I don't think the expectation anywhere would be that things are all perfect and everything is completely egalitarian, but really being able to talk honestly and openly about those things. And that's what I find the most encouraging about our community. In Greenville, even with a lot of the folks and organizations I've had the opportunity and been fortunate enough to work with, even in Spartanburg, is that there is an open table to say, okay, how do we kind of shift the lens and look inwardly and say, how do we fix this? How do we change the things that are going on? And that's where it starts. For communities that are unwilling to really address the issues and where inequality exists, they can't move it forward. And Greenville, I think, is really kind of grabbed the bull by the horns and having lots of big conversations like this one, lots of little conversations where folks are trying to connect the dots and move the needle forward.
I think we all probably wrote down answers to these questions before we came, and the awareness is one of the first thing that I wrote down. The fact that it's important for this community, any community, to be aware of the issues and also aware of the importance of lifting everyone up. I think that, and again, I'm influenced by this whole economic mobility education that we have all received. And if you look at what is happening in our community in Greenville, there's tremendous growth, economic attainment for many people, but not for all. So I think it's important for the community in general to understand the issues. And I think sometimes that we in the philanthropic sector and in the social sector are guilty of talking to just each other. And I've had that happen recently. I sat at a table with a corporate executive here in Greenville, and I started talking about we're doing this, we're doing that, and housing and transportation, and he said, who's we? Who's doing this? And I said, that is an issue, and I think it's important to be able to expand that conversation so that everybody in the community understands the issues. And then when you get down to the specifics, I think it's absolutely critical for us to, in this community, continue and enhance the conversation about transportation, the conversation about affordable housing, workforce housing, the accessibility to good jobs, but the accessibility to good quality childcare and also good education, educational opportunities. And all of those things work together, and without those and working together in an effective way, then we're not going to be able to move the needle. So.
Thank you. So I think, I hate to repeat what you all have said, but for me, an economically empowered community is one that provides access and opportunities to those demographics that are undervalued and underutilized. So the same as everyone here has been saying, and I don't see that our state is modeling that. I see that we're beginning to see the bigger picture, and we're beginning to see why we need to be more aware and more inclusive. But I think as a community and as a state, we have to do much better. I see resources being allocated to a variety of demographics in our state that really, really need it. But I don't see those resources being funneled to women, to the area that are important to women. Women are such crucial factors to the economy. But I still see the undervaluing of what women actually bring to the table, especially for this demographic of women that I work with. I definitely do not see that open seat at the table that Faith talked about. We don't, these women who've been out of the workforce for these extended periods of times, they are somewhat of a forgotten demographic. So I do not see those resources being funneled that way it's like they don't need anything, to prepare them to re-enter the workforce. So I still think there's a lot of work to do, to continue to invest in the women in our area.
I want to thank everybody for what they already said, and I don't want to repeat that. But one of the things that really stands out to me is that if everyone doesn't have the opportunity to pursue liberty and happiness in our country and in our society, then we have work to do. And that means that we need access. We need equal opportunity and access to basic needs for life. And so if people don't have that, that means we still have work to do. And just on a positive note, one of the communities that I have seen that I think is doing better and is a good example of work that we could be doing is Denver. I just came back from Denver a few weeks ago. ICS was there promoting STEM and arts integration into early education. And I got the opportunity to sit down with some leaders there, including a woman who was putting together a kind of an empowerment center with a mixed model of childcare, of Head Start and a sliding scale. But that's just one of the things that they were doing. The fact that the community was so supportive of that kind of effort really made my heart sing. And part of that is because in one of my previous jobs here in Greenville, I was helping to put together such an empowerment center with Representative Chandra Dillard. But I do that work because I believe in it so much, and it directly helps to inform the work that I'm doing now. Let me just add this. Denver is not just looking at childcare. They're not just supporting things like that. That is a truly collaborative community out there. They've got the librarians at the table. They've got transportation people at the table. They have engineers. Everybody is coming together to make Denver the best place it can be. And they still have flaws. But when you can walk out and get a train from the airport to your hotel, and all you have to do is jump on a free bus that goes down the mall in the middle of the city, I mean, that's progress. And I think Greenville can get there.
I would also echo everything that was said here, and I think maybe taking a slightly different approach. Recently, especially, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to get at some of the just pervasive problems that never seem to go away, that disproportionately affect women and people of color. I think, to me, I've sort of spent my life trying to put together the puzzle, having worked in some policy, having worked in the business world. My degree is actually in theology, and here I am at a Chamber of Commerce. I think all of the policy pieces are, of course, the underpinning to any empowered economy, but it strikes me that no matter how many good conversations are happening, no matter how many good policy proposals and ideas we put forward, until we have representative leadership, there's not much change that's going to happen. And so I think, to me, the number one indicator of an empowered economy is one that has as many women and people of color on the other side of the decision-making dais as the sort of traditional pale male stale dioceses tend to look right now. At risk of sort of being out there, I think that's the priority, right? Is representative leadership, because until that changes, I don't really see a lot. I don't really see a lot of policy changing either.
Great, thank you for that. Minor, I want to pick up on something you mentioned in your in the answer to the last question. You're unique. You've really been at the forefront of both economic development as well as social impact investing in this region and the Carolinas. And you reinforce that you're somewhat unique by saying that a lot of people in the community who may be leaders of business or driving economic development aren't necessarily attuned to some of the challenges of equity that we're talking about today. And How can we start to change that? Where are some of the entry points that are maybe already there that we can build on, or new collaborations that we can think about?
Well, I do think that we are making progress in that area. I think we are, we have a long way to go, but I think that particularly in the philanthropic sector in Greenville has come together. I see Sue Priester sitting there, and she started Greenville Women's Giving. That is a large part of our philanthropic sector, and we've got a number of foundations in this community, and we then have come together in the Partnership for Philanthropy. So in that Partnership for Philanthropy, we've also got not just your traditional foundations, family foundations, or the Hollingsworth funds and stuff like that, but you've also got corporate foundations. And so what we're trying to do is to bring people together and look at these problems together, understand what the issues are in the community, and educate people together. In fact, we're getting ready in the Partnership for Philanthropy to bring in someone and talk about community impact and making a difference in the way you invest your money. I think that one of the things that's happened is that in Greenville, and really I think stimulated by the philanthropic sector, we're beginning to realize, I mean, we've always known this, but we're actively beginning to realize that you have to have all sectors of the economy working together to be able to make a difference. So you need to have the corporate world around the table, you need to have the philanthropic world, the nonprofit world, you've got to have your government entities around the table. Because when you start looking at the percentage of money we might give away in the philanthropic sector, it's tiny compared to what impact you can have if you get both your city and your county working together. So what we're trying to do, I think, in a very active way, whether it's to be with housing, and now we have the Greenville Housing Fund, or whether it's transportation, and we're working with the city and the county to come together, as well as a corporate group that's working at downtown transportation and housing. We're beginning to try to pull more people around the table. The other thing that I think is important is for all of us can be philanthropic, and it doesn't have to come through your financial output. It can come through, there's a word that James Joseph, who used to be head of the Council of Foundations and the ambassador to Tanzania or South Africa, said, SMURF, many of you might have heard this, and I always get it wrong, Sue, you can help me, but it's the social, moral, intellectual, financial, and reputational capital that we all have, and we can use that in so many different ways. So I believe that the more we can get this message out to the broader community, the more we can come together so that people understand that they have the ability to make a difference. And I think that's happening. Greenville's always been a very aggressive community, and we've always, I think, been a very entrepreneurial community. We don't want to leave people out, but now we're beginning to come together so that we can be more aware of that opportunity to be inclusive.
And hopefully aggressive about the inclusion as
well
as the growth.
We are beginning to be, and
That's great.
you know, maybe even the foundations are beginning to get more politically active too, but you have to be very careful about that.
Yes, we'll talk more about that later. Or now, anybody feel free to dive in on that if you'd like. Betsy, so, you know, we talked a little bit about the business case, about the bottom line arguments that can be made for advancing women's leadership in the workforce and diverse leadership in the workforce. The truth is we've been making that case for a while now, right? And do you see things changing, and with the businesses you work with in Spartanburg or that you've worked with throughout the country, are we getting more serious about investing in that potential? And what do we need to do to kind of accelerate our progress in that area?
So I'll answer this in a couple of parts. First, let me caveat by saying that, you know, to be honest, I am still new to this market. And so, you know, having only been working in this area specifically for about 7 months, I think I probably still have a lot to learn. However, I think it remains true that you cannot drive economic growth in any community when 50% or more of the population you're trying to serve is not a part of determining that plan. And so I think to your point, and we know we're able to articulate that inclusivity brings excellence. I think active, intentional inclusivity is the way to go with that, but really until we are intentional about being inclusive with our leadership, I don't believe there will be real marked change. I think the proof will be in the pudding, right? So I think in Spartanburg there are a lot of really good conversations happening right now. So many of the conversations that have been mentioned here at the table are also happening in Spartanburg on the economic mobility front, also with the racial equity, I think was brought up down here a little bit. We're trying to infuse much of Spartanburg's conversations with those, not only sort of the ideology brought forth in those groups, but also the data that's presented there. However, a conversation is one thing, but until you actually start to see, a change happen, it's hard to know whether it's being effective or not. This is not exactly what you asked me, but you indicated, how do we sort of recruit and retain women into the workforce? And I started thinking about this, and just a minute ago when you put your stat up about 20% of women living in poverty, and I don't remember exactly what the stat was, but sort of the women being out of the workforce in a higher numbers across all age ranges. I think when you talk about women being engaged in the workforce, one of the first steps that we have to take, and I find this to be especially true in South Carolina, is dispelling the myth that women have much choice at all in the matter. I think a lot of times we talk about women opting out. I don't think that is the case. Just a couple of notes I jotted down when you were talking, and mothers, for example, are often described as opting out, but the truth is that most mothers are simply out of options. We talk about whether we're working as a choice, but it's really an economic bargain that women are striking based out of fear and necessity. I think is even in a strong economy, women are operating in a culture of scarcity. Self-fulfillment, even career advancement is a low priority, I think, in an economy where women continue to feel insecurity. And, I just think that choices made out of fear are not choices at all. And so I think the first step there is dispelling the myth that these are choices that women are making, so that we can talk about it, address the mountains of burden that most mothers face due to high child care costs, high costs of even having a child. I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think it's hard to lean in when you're walking on eggshells all the time. So
Yeah. Great. And that's a perfect transition, I think, to Nichelle, who can tell us more about the people that you work with through the MAP agency. Talk about some of those very real challenges and barriers, the reasons why women may leave the workforce, and then the barriers they encounter when they may be trying to re-enter or change careers or paths.
Definitely, and I agree with you, Betsy. It's not always a choice. You don't opt out. A lot of times once you put everything on the table, it's the choice that has to be made and what makes the most sense at that moment, what works for your family, and it's going to be very individual. And women we're faced with a lot of barriers, a myriad of barriers when it comes to re-entering the workforce. Personally, I left the workforce. I worked for 15 years in marketing and brand promotion, and I stepped away from the workforce because I could not downshift. I could not go part-time. It was just, so I had to walk away at that moment, and I didn't intend for it to be 4 years. I don't think many women go into it saying, okay, I'll stay out for a year or I'll stay out for 5 years, and you look up and sometimes it's 10 years that have gone by once you really get into doing the things that need to be done to move your family forward. And when it comes time to move back into the workforce, there are barriers that are there for these women, and I can talk about them on 3 kind of easy to digest levels. On an organizational level, these are the barriers that the companies themselves place. They have in place. Our companies simply do not have resources or programs or even the inclination to engage this demographic. As I mentioned before, we are somewhat of a forgotten demographic, and it's really hard for me to believe because when I started this agency, when I started to see the level of talent that was out of the workforce, it really just floored me. Like, these women that were coming in with all these years of experience and, trying to go back into the workforce and not hearing anything back, that's simply being ignored. And the ones that do go back, I often see that they are underemployed. So these companies are not putting the kind of resources into engaging the women. And that's not working. It's not working for the companies. That's why we're having events like this. That's why the economy or the workforce is in the situation that it is now. It's not working. These companies are letting these women walk out, and they take their talents and they take their skills with them. And that's just simply not working. They don't put any effort into retaining the women. So on an organizational level, that's a barrier. The lack of flexibility is also an organizational barrier. A lot of companies are still very traditional in the way that they want to work. They see flexibility as working less, and it's not. It's really about working differently. Our workforce has changed so much, but companies are refusing to embrace different models of working. And these different models of working would open up the workforce to so many more qualified people, especially women. So flexibility is a huge component that's often it's often framed as a women's issue, but it's not. I think flexibility works for all of us, for men, for women, and it especially works for families. So it's something that really needs to be taken a look at. On a cultural level, the barriers that are there for women is what we call the motherhood penalty. Once you leave the workforce, you're looked at in a certain way. You're looked at as being less devoted to your career. If she left one time, she may leave again. She's going to be less dedicated to do the work that needs to be done around here. So we're not even going to put her on this path to advancing her because she's got all this going on at home. So that's one of the cultural barriers that we face. And that also comes with, age. Sometimes women are seen as being less valuable, when you've been out of the workforce and for a variety of reasons. And it's not just mothers. I see this happening more and more, that daughters are having to do elder care. Daughters are becoming the caregivers for their parents. So it's a variety of reasons why women leave the workforce, but you do have those biases, coming back in. So we can't overlook the personal barriers. I think someone up here talked about our confidence levels, and when you're out of the workforce for an extended amount of time, our confidence levels take a huge hit. So personal barriers are also out there.
Great. Amanda, childcare is so critical to this conversation. Early childhood development, I know I can only be here today because there's somebody who is at home this morning helping me get my kids to school, and that my kids have access to high quality preschool. So I think many of us can personally relate to how important childcare is. But talk about when we're talking about these big issues about women in the workforce, how are we doing in terms of increasing access to childcare and early childhood development? Where are we falling short? What do we need to do more of?
Well, the best demonstration that I'd like to start out with is please raise your hand if you have had to be put on a wait list to receive access to childcare. So there you go. There's an access issue. A majority of the people in this room just raised their hands. So let's just start with that. A lot of people here have already said some things that I planned to say today, but I think they were kind of worth repeating in some situations. But I want to share the most important takeaway, I think, for trying to help move the needle on childcare and why it's important. And my slogan for 2018-2019 as I move forward is kindergarten readiness is workforce readiness. So kindergarten readiness is workforce readiness for children, for families, and employers. So let me just start out with a study that I read, and this study was used a sample from Chapel Hill with the university there, and the National Bureau of Economic Research looked at their sample, which was a 8-week to 5 years beginning, and a longitudinal study for the same children all the way until their mid-30s. For people who are research and data wonks like me, this was a high-risk sample. It was a longitudinal study, like I said, and this was a randomized controlled trial. So the boys who attended child care with enriching activities, qualified faculty in a nurturing environment were 11 to 19% more likely than boys in lower quality facilities to be employed by age 30. They were also making between $19,000 to $24,000 more. They were less likely to commit crimes. The annual return on investment on this early childhood programs for disadvantaged children in this case was 13.5%. The girls who attended these high quality programs were 13 to 15% more likely to graduate high school, 13% more likely to graduate college, and 8 to 13% more likely to have a job at age 30. So if that all by itself doesn't tell you why we need quality care, I mean, I'm going to have to try to help you out some more here. Because for families, women, like we said, make up almost half of the workforce. They were the primary, their breadwinner in half of all families with children. So 29.93% of Greenville County children are raised by a single female parent. 4.98% of those children of Greenville County children are raised by a single male parent. Like, that's a big difference. So women are disproportionately susceptible to facing economic insecurity at all stages of their life. That includes employment discrimination, overrepresentation in low-wage jobs, difficulty accessing affordable comprehensive health care, and greater responsibilities for unpaid caregiving, which we've already touched on. Women are more likely to give up work, choice, no choice, and pay steep penalties if they wish to return. Now for the employers, there's a pyramid model for supporting social emotional competence in infants and young children, which supports the fact that quality child care leads to a more proficient workforce. You can look on the Vanderbilt website for that. There's a big resource there. There's the social emotional competence that is provided through quality care environments is equally or more important to future academic development than learning numbers and letters. Parents who have access to quality care and or schedules that allow flexibility are more productive and happy at work. I'm going to shout out to ICS on that because we're flexible there. We also access to quality, affordable care for young children enables 25,818 parents to work, increasing the workforce productivity and family incomes by over $1 billion annually. Conversely, the inability of some parents to access dependable child care costs the South Carolina economy $900 million in foregone wages and absenteeism. So that's why this is important, and that kindergarten readiness is workforce readiness. But what we're doing well in South Carolina right now is our DSS is actually working really hard on improving and upgrading quality standards through their ABC and program for infant and toddler care. The First Step scholarships help support moms, teens, and parents who are in the workforce or going to school to, re-enter the workforce. The Kelly Wren Academy expands access to scholarships for families who want to get high quality preschool care. That's a nonprofit here in Greenville. I mean, that's a great thing, right? I mean, and it's kind of, these First Steps and Kelly Wren scholarships are filling in where our vouchers are not, but I'll get to that in a minute. I also want to highlight the fact that the Greenville Chambers got some renewed efforts in looking at childcare, which really makes me happy. They did a survey recently that 36% of Greenville businesses are interested now in looking at this childcare issue, which makes it timely for us to be talking about this. And I also want to highlight that Greenville's European-based corporations' progressive policies for childcare, I mean, they are getting it done. They are giving their employees subsidies. They're signing up for slots and saving spaces for their employees' children to get care. So that's a good thing. And also want to highlight that there's an underutilized 1995 credit for employee child care programs. So that, I mean, not many people know about that or use it, but if you subsidize your employees' child care, you get a tax credit as a business. So where we're falling short, we already had the demonstration, but the voucher and the subsidy access for child care, I am just appalled, honestly. I talked with somebody about the eligibility requirements for those vouchers yesterday, and appalled is the right word. You know, you have to be in a group called kind of essentially Poverty Plus to get a voucher. And that's why these additional services that First Steps and the Kelly Wren Academy are affording are so important. But I think we can do more. We need to expand the income eligibility for those vouchers. And then we also need to make those limits flexible so that people who make 50 cents more aren't penalized. As we all know, 50 cents isn't really helping pay the rent. We need to expand the number of slots available, especially in infant and toddler care. We need child care provider pay increases, benefits, and education. Those are areas where we're severely lacking. The access to early Head Start is lacking funding to meet demands and wait lists. So some solutions I see, where we're falling short is a commitment to finding solutions for these issues. I've heard a lot of people say, we can't do that, or there's a lot of red tape, and I know there is, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't commit to solving these problems.
We'll have more time for solutions later, so this is an excellent preview.
Yep.
Yeah, anything else you want to
Nope, that was it.
Okay.
I was going to say,
Okay.
and so we'll talk about solutions later.
Great, wonderful. We want you all to feel really, nervous right now and like you want to stay and talk about solutions. So, Faith, so I would love for you to talk about this unique collaboration through the Greenville Network for Southern Economic Mobility, which is leveraging really exciting new commitments in Greenville County. And to hear your reflections on how a women-centered approach or a focus on gender inequity may or may not be part of those conversations, and where you see opportunities for making sure that we are tackling some of these disparities when we're developing solutions for economic mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of touches on some of what our other panelists have said here, but really anyone who kind of comes to the table and says, okay, what do you mean when you talk about economic mobility? There's a lot of factors that affect that, and really what we tried to do as a team, I'm a data hungry person. I did a degree in data analysis, so I can kind of get bogged down by that sometimes, but really how do you whittle it down to the core factors that are really affecting it for our community? And it can be overwhelming because there are a lot of things, right? We're talking about childcare, we're talking about transportation and education, we're talking about gaps in pay on gender and on racial lines. And so it can feel overwhelming to say, okay, well, where are the most important areas to tackle? It feels hard to say that one is more important or less important than another when you're really trying to figure out how to push things forward. But one of the things that was really interesting, and specifically to your question, Anne, was that when you look at that, when you say, okay, where are the greatest disparities? If you're looking completely with a blind eye to say what we need to tackle first, women are the hugest demographic. They are the largest demographic nationally, but specifically within our city, that are really struggling because of this. So it's very easy to say, okay, that is definitely a point of focus. It touches back to some of what you showed in your presentation, to what Amanda said. We've got 30+ % of households that are run by single mothers. I mean, that's astonishing. It's vacillated over the past couple of years. We've had some spans where it's gotten better and some where it's gotten worse, but that's huge. And second to that, of those households, about 17% of them are run by mothers who have less than a high school education. So when you talk about access, when you talk about the things that you really need to jump into to help women in our community, that's huge. So, for us as a group with NSCM, which is what we call Network for Southern Economic Mobility, the mouthful, is really how do we help and get involved with what our community is already doing. So, our goal and our approach isn't to create another organization or another program, but to say Greenville has a lot of good work that is already happening, a lot of organizations that are working, represented by the folks at this table, to really push that forward. How do we continue to collaborate with those groups? How do we continue to amplify the work that is being done so that our community can really get behind it? Amanda, I appreciated what you said about your observations of Denver and that community, and Greenville has that. It has a lot of passionate people who really want to help move that forward. And so how do we amplify the good that is happening so that folks are able to say not just, philanthropy, as Minor mentioned, but, and I loved that Smurf, right? What do we have to bring to the table to say that we can help women, we can help them get educated, we can help move the needle specifically for the most vulnerable demographic in our community. So that's really what we have focused on, is really figuring out how to leverage those good things that are happening and amplify.
Great. We want to give all of you who are part of the good things that are happening in this region a chance to ask some questions. So we've got some mics, and we'll take maybe a couple of questions and then let the panelists respond, whoever feels they would like to respond to the question. So first question, and then we'll go straight to whoever wants to be next. Go ahead and raise your hand, and a runner will come to you. Yes. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sarah Lynn Howie with the Junior League of Greenville. Myra, you mentioned earlier about women being one of the first women on many boards. I wonder what your take is on California's new law of mandating that.
Well, I love that. When I read it in the paper, I said, wow, this is great. And I actually took that information to a lot of people that I've served with. I'm on the board of the Carolinas chapter of the NACD, the National Association for Corporate Directors. And interestingly, we've probably got more women, or at least half women, half of the board members are women. And that is something that I think that we need to amplify here in the anywhere, whether it's the Carolinas or whatever. But I think that one of the things that we don't do a good job of is publicizing the fact that corporations with women directors in particular do much better in the marketplace. And we actually, for those of you who might have been at the luncheon yesterday, the Athena Women's Leadership Symposium, Jody McLean, who's the CEO of Eden's company, a very large commercial real estate company, gave us statistics of how many corporations, and I actually read some too about corporations who do better. We've got to get that information out into the media more and more and more. And it can't just be the national media. We need to get it to the local media also. I think where you read it is the national media. It is tremendously beneficial to have women around the table, and I was thrilled to see that happen in California. I don't know, and you know, in Europe, I think in England and in Europe, it's mandatory. So it's beginning to catch up, and I'm delighted.
Great. The policy levers that we can use are, it's a great question. Thank you. Do we have another question? Christy.
Just to follow up with that, I was kind of curious, and this was mentioned at one of the last conferences. I bet I can hear what you got it. Yeah. So one of the questions I had was, how does one go about exploring board service in the corporate world there? I mean, that's one of the things that I had always heard, but I never knew how we go about exploring that for ourselves or putting ourselves. Yeah.
Can we answer?
Yes, please.
Okay. You know, it's very difficult. So it's not an easy solution. I think what you have to do is you have to be aware of networking. You need to put yourself in situations where you will be with other people in the corporate world, whether it's sitting around the United Way board table or whatever, maybe a lot of nonprofits, and you meet a lot of people that way. People, you have to get your resume in order. You need to look at your skills. What is your area that you really feel like you are most proficient in, or that you really like, and see where you would like to serve. And look at your own resume, look at your educational skills, and see if would you hire you? Would you ask yourself to be on a corporate board? It's gotten much harder, I think, even though the door is opening more for more women to be on boards. While I've been on the corporate boards, I've seen that it's gotten much more selective. And now people, when they have board searches, they are looking at their board and they're saying, well, we need somebody in compliance. We need somebody who's a financial expert. They are not looking, unfortunately, they're not looking for generalists. And I think if I were going through it today, I might not be on some of the boards that I'm on. In my case, in the early days of when I started this, I was the only woman on several boards, and they were looking at probably for women with some investment experience. And so, but today, those same boards that I'm referring to would probably not ask me to be on the board because my experience would not be deep enough. So I would say that you need to network. There are organizations nationally, the Women Corporate Directors Network, where they have training opportunities for women. So, and then you have to put yourself out there and let people know that you would like to be on boards, and go meet with people so they'll know that.
Can I add to that? So one of the things that we're doing at the Spartanburg Area Chamber of Commerce, I mentioned earlier that we have a project called the Pipeline Project, and that's based on findings that came out of a community assessment, and also just, you know, our own two eyeballs looking at all of the boards that are in Spartanburg and noticing that there's great disparity in who is sitting on those boards versus what the county actually looks like. And so what we've put together, and this is really just the beginning, is a board pipeline that aims, first of all, to identify rising stars in the Spartanburg community, to provide leadership opportunities for those rising stars through not only Spartanburg's leadership programs, but the Diversity Leadership Institute here at Furman, Leadership South Carolina. So we provide scholarships for those rising stars to go and attend one of those leadership programs. We've actually created a physical, searchable database of all of the Spartanburg County graduates of those programs who would like to be listed, who are interested in some sort of board position, so that if you're looking for somebody in compliance, you can search by that skill, you can search by leadership program, and you can see, here is a woman who is an expert in compliance, who is eligible for our board. And so I mentioned earlier that I feel like I'm in the business of eliminating excuses, and this is just that. So I said once, never again do I want somebody to come to me and say, oh, well, we tried to diversify our board, but we just couldn't find anybody to fill those slots. Because we've got people to fill those slots, and we're growing that database of people to fill those slots. And then the last piece of that is to actually, and I was going to say this earlier, I think, in response to what you were talking about, Faith, I think that the big gap in what a lot of our sort of community conversations that are happening in Spartanburg and what we want to happen on an economic empowerment level is that it's very rare that business leaders are at the table, whether it's a groundwater racial equity training or the economic mobility task force. It's very rare that it's the business leaders who are a part of those conversations. And so to get the business community at those tables and to make the business case to the people who are actually running businesses is sort of the gap. And so the sort of last piece of that pipeline project has been and will be to go and train local boards on the business case for expanding diversity and inclusion, and also how to go about doing it. And since June, our team has trained 197 leaders in Spartanburg on diversity, equity, and inclusion in conjunction with launching that database. We still have a long way to go, but I mean, I think in these communities, it's one thing to know where we want to get, but there's a whole lot of hand-holding that has to go with that. And I think the elimination of those barriers just one by one by one is the first approach until we get some critical mass in leadership positions.
Great. Other questions? We have time for a couple more. And here, and then here, and then we'll.
Hi, my name is Kirby Crow. I'm with Money with a Mission. And I was just thinking about, I can't remember who said it, but you were talking about how women are underrepresented in lower wage jobs. Overrepresented. Oh, I'm sorry, overrepresented. And that got me thinking, well, I really don't want to get to a place where I'm like, okay, well now women are equally represented in lower wage jobs. You know, like that doesn't seem like the solution. Like, what about the fact that our economic system is built on this whole, I guess, platform of lower wage jobs, like food service or housekeeping or different things like that. And, you know, it seems like all of these things we're talking about, like access to opportunities and education and empowerment, are kind of like this boulder that we're rolling up a hill, and the hill is like our current economic system. So how, I mean, and I want to keep rolling the boulder, I do, but I also want to like chip away at the hill. And is that just too big a task to take on? Like, I don't know where these questions are. But I mean, all of you very wonderful ladies are doing important work, and I just wonder, like, are you talking about and thinking about and working on this whole other side of things that's creating a lot of the problems? I'm sorry, that was so big.
No, it's a good question. And yeah, do you have an immediate response to that, Amanda? Go. I was going to suggest maybe we take 1, 2, 3, and then let folks answer where they feel comfortable. So Sue, did you have a question? You had your.
Hi, Sue Priester, Greenville Women Giving. You've talked about corporate boards and the corporate world, but first question, is it not true that most people are employed by small businesses that do not have boards, that entrepreneurial people can do, you know, what within the law, what they want? That's the background I come from. How do you reach that segment of employers in with the kinds of messaging that you're talking about?
Can I answer that real quick? So in Spartanburg County, 95% of employers are small employers, and there are about 44,000 lives represented as employees of those small employers. That's not including families that are represented. Right now, we have a rare gift of a very, very competitive talent market in Spartanburg County, in which small employers are having a very, very hard time retaining their talent. And so our team, and Dawn Maddox over here, her wonderful family is helping out a lot with this endeavor. We are creating a talent retention strategy that includes a lot of the things that we're talking about here for our small employers. It includes transportation, childcare is another thing that's on the docket there, health and well-being services, as well as access to insurance navigation, things like that. And so I think for your small employers, your nonprofits, your corporate entities alike, one of the beautiful things about our economy right now is that they need the workers more than the workers need them. And so I think if we use that to our advantage, I was going to say earlier, the good news is because of the access that we have to folks who are decision makers in this place, because of the size of the Greenville-Spartanburg area, the good news is that we don't actually have to be held hostage by intractable policies that bleed our households dry. We can actually influence some change, and I think with the economy as it is in this moment in time, it's incumbent upon us to leap upon that and try to get some of those things in place.
Great. Can we just get one last question, and then you can go back and answer any of these excellent questions that have been asked. Yes.
My name's Lydia Glad. I'm a student here. I'm majoring in sociology and minoring in women, gender, and sexuality studies. My question is for all of you. Can any of you guys think of a moment of personal hardship that provided you with a new perspective that has helped you to benefit other women and empower them or yourselves?
Awesome question. So we've got a question about really the mix of, what is our economy based on? How can we increase the quality of jobs that are available and give women opportunities to move out of low-wage work and into more secure, family-sustaining work? I think is really where they have family-sustaining wages and opportunities over time. I think that's kind of, if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly. And then about another type of employer diversity, which is small business. And then this excellent question about a more personal take on how you have been empowered or encouraged along your path.
How do you want us to go about? Those are three very different.
You jump in, and we've got 30 seconds for each of you to respond to whatever you would like to respond to.
I would really like to answer the personal question here, because the business that I've started here was very personal to me. With me being out of the workforce, I thought this was something that was happening to me. And I came out of my shell a little bit, and I started talking to other women. I was doing a lot of volunteering, and I opened my mouth and I started talking to these other women. Surely, do you want to be out of work? What was your, experience like? And I started hearing my own story back. And then everyone kind of like, who, you too? It was like a weight kind of office. So it's been very personal to me. And my agency is membership based, so I have over 100 members right now, and it's really important to me because these women make the decision to join my agency. They look at what I'm doing, and we share a lot of things in common, and I think that's what kind of makes me continue to go on and do the work that I do. Like, it's very personal to me, and it's important. Not only I'm not out here knocking on every door, for corporations to work with these women. I carefully kind of pick and choose the corporations that really embrace the mission and that really say, look at these women and look at myself and say, there's some value there, and we really want to invest in it. So it was really personal to me when I was going through that period of not being able to find anything. That's what really inspired me. And I get these women that come to me every day, and they're in tears, like literally, that someone has listened, and someone really values what they've been through and say, it's okay. Of course there's, time of confusion right now, but it's okay. It's gonna get better, or it can get better. It's not just happening to you. It's something that is a shared experience. So it's very personal to me, and that is what inspires me to go on.
Amanda, you're ready to jump in.
Oh yeah, I'm fired up about this social services question. So I've got so many thoughts about this. I could go on forever, but let me just say this. I think that I would like to make the point that it's not just people in fast food services and housekeepers who are making low wages. Social services are severely undervalued in our society, and I think that's a cultural problem. There's some communities who understand the value and they invest in it more, but you can even look, and I'm sorry, I don't want to make people upset, but you can even look at the way people in nonprofit are paid in Greenville. I mean, it's a privilege to be able to work in nonprofit in a couple of different ways. Yes, we're all doing well, and we're all doing good work that we believe in, and that makes our hearts happy at the end of the day, and that's great. But if you can't pay your bills and you can't pay childcare, that's an issue. So you have to rely on your spouse to be able to make ends meet. So, you know, if you're just a single mother, so you've got to make a choice between, maybe some people might be making a choice between doing something that they love and have their training in and believe in, versus going, well, I'm going to have to find something that helps me put food on the table. And I don't think that's fair. And I have a friend who just moved to Alaska because she spent several years giving her heart and soul to South Carolina children and victims of rape and violence and domestic abuse. And she could not afford to pay her bills. She had to move to Alaska where they value social workers so that she can pay her bills and pay back her student loans that she accumulated so that she can help others. And I am very fired up about that issue.
I'm sorry, Faye. But so I was just going to add to that. I mean, I think you're right. Like, there's no like one thing that you can, there's no one lever that you can pull that's going to take down that mountain. And by the way, even talking about taking down that mountain is pretty dangerous talk, right? Because there are a lot of people who are invested in keeping that mountain the way that it is. Language, again, I think is one of the most important things that we need to get at. For example, in our 5-year community and economic plan, one of the recommendations in Spartanburg County is universal free pre-K. You say that out loud and it's like, whoa, what? You know, I mean, so I think that learning how to talk about things in a way that is both big and bold and thinks big, but doesn't immediately shut off the conversation is pretty important. I would say that it's not just about wages, but when I think about getting at your question and really sort of the heart of many of the questions that we're dealing with, it comes down to things like accessible, affordable childcare, housing stock, affordable housing stock, competitive wages, and infrastructure so that people can get to where they need to be, right? And so, again, not to like pick on this, but I would go back to with representative leadership that has actually experienced any one of these things at the table will go farther than we will with the leadership that we have today.
Great. Faith, you looked like you were ready.
Yeah, I was going to say to your question about some of the smaller businesses and organizations, and really how do you encourage folks who have their own agency to say, no, we don't want to do this, really to value those things. I spent a number of years working with a local organization in Greenville as a director of a code school, and one of the things that I thought was fascinating in that work was that, you know, really what our organization did was it was an alternative form of education that a lot of people thought was a little bit strange or hadn't heard of, and having conversations with local businesses to say, here's a way you can integrate folks who are coming through this different kind of new method of being trained in workforce development and ingratiate that into what your organization is doing. And it was an uphill battle to say, okay, how do I convince this person to do it? And I just wanted to share from my experience, really showing them the data. Things like, you know, what you said, Minor, which is, you know, when you have women in these positions of leadership, you do better. And I think sometimes just having that conversation, if you have the opportunity to sit at the table with business leaders and organizations, is eye-opening to them. Sometimes they just don't know. So when you're able to say, if you take this person who comes from an atraditional background, who is a minority of some sort, anywhere on that spectrum, including women, this is really going to help you. It's going to help your organization, and it's going to help our community, that people really want to be a part of that. Even if it's just for kind of the surface level reason of saying, we want to look like we're being a part of the solution, right? If you're speaking to, the ethos and ego of really wanting to have them be a part of that in the community, I saw huge strides that organizations were willing to take when they were really presented with that challenge. And then the last thing I would say to your wonderful question, in kind of jumping into this work, I've kind of collected a lot of stories of other people, but that's one of the things our team challenged ourselves to do, is to say, we're talking about economic mobility, we can think we're talking about other people. That's this like demographic somewhere of these disadvantaged women and not us. And for me, one of the things I come back to all the time is, my parents were both immigrants from Nigeria. And it is, as the story it is with a lot of immigrant families, there was a lot of hardship that came from that, from being otherized within my community, for being this weird third culture where I wasn't fully African, but I wasn't fully American in this very strange way, that I had a lot of folks along the way who were in that weird middle where they grew up in poverty like I did. They grew up and they had a different culture that they claimed, as well as the culture that they grew up in, who were able to model for me what it looked like to be a woman and to be a leader and to be someone who really wanted to be daring and kind of grabbing at that seat at the table when I could. And so that was hugely important for me. And I think that is a great question to continue to ask. So thank you for that.
Great. Mina, we're going to let you close us out here.
Well, this sort of encompasses several of the questions, but in terms of experiences and how you were affected by this, I'll always go back to my first job experiences and seeing how there were no women in leadership in the bank that I was working with, and there were years before women were promoted in that particular bank, or in banking in general, and banking was my first area. So I saw that, and I saw how the young men who were fresh out of law school were being promoted, and the women who were doing all the work were not. And I've always remembered that. So I've been lucky enough to be on the boards, but what I have seen in my work, whether it is in boards membership for nonprofits, in particular nonprofits, how difficult it's sometimes been to find women who are qualified to sit on those boards. Now, there are a lot of women out there, but to be able to have people know who they are is absolutely critical, and to be able to network with those women is critical. So I've tried to meet with anybody who wants to meet with me, to try to recommend them, to try to mentor, and I think that's a responsibility that we all have. And I think it's also a responsibility for us to be supportive of other women and to give them a hand up in all ways. And then in terms of the other side of the equation, going back to your question about moving the boulder up the hill, I think looking at, you've got to, if you're looking up here at the board membership, that's one thing, but you're never going to be able to get more people up at this level unless you move that boulder up from the bottom. And that means your social network. It means your education, access to education, good quality childcare that's accessible, and also good education, and being able to have the social services that are there and accessible and available to everybody, but particularly to women, because we know that women represent the highest poverty level in our community. So I think you can never work up here without working in all sections of the spectrum.
Great. Thank you so much. Will you all please join me in thanking this great panel?